Arctic sovereignty is a strategic priority of our government. The world is changing. Our adversaries are increasingly emboldened. International institutions and norms that have kept Canada secure are now being called into question.
The European Union just unleashed a €26 billion retaliatory tariff package against the United States, creating the largest coordinated economic counterstrike in recent history. This calculated political move directly challenges Donald Trump's campaign narrative. Meanwhile, Canada is reconsidering its oil exports to the US, which currently account for over 60% of American oil imports. These coordinated actions could trigger immediate domestic consequences, including potentially skyrocketing gas prices. As Trump focuses on social media events and rallies, international allies are systematically dismantling his economic leverage points in ways that threaten American consumers and supply chains. In what appears to be the most coordinated economic counteroffensive in recent history, the European Union has unleashed a €26 billion tariff package against the United States. This isn't merely a routine trade adjustment, but a meticulously engineered economic weapon designed to maximize political impact while demonstrating Europe's newfound assertiveness on the global stage. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's announcement carries unmistakable strategic significance beyond its economic implications. Tariffs are a burden on businesses and consumers. We will not stand idle. Europe refuses to negotiate. They are ready to respond aggressively, she stated, signaling the EU's unwillingness to accept American trade policies without consequence. This forceful declaration indicates a calculated attempt to disrupt American political equilibrium during a sensitive electoral period. While political attention in the United States has been dominated by social media pronouncements and high-profile endorsements, the European Union has been methodically constructing an economic response that strikes at America's most politically sensitive pressure points. The tariff structure reveals sophisticated political intelligence, functioning like a surgical strike on America's economic pressure points. Wisconsin's motorcycle manufacturers, Pennsylvania's industrial equipment producers, and Michigan's agricultural exporters now face substantial barriers to European markets. Each targeted industry represents thousands of American jobs in states where electoral margins are traditionally narrow. Behind these tariff selections lies months of complex economic modeling. European economists conducted extensive analyses to identify sectors where this massive package would generate maximum political pressure while minimizing potential blowback to EU economies. This mathematical approach to trade warfare represents a sophisticated evolution in how economic tools are deployed for political leverage. Internal EU documents indicate months of advanced planning, including detailed contingency protocols for various potential American responses. This level of preparation signifies a fundamental shift in how Europe approaches trade conflicts, no longer reactive, but proactively gaming out multiple scenarios with corresponding response packages ready for deployment. The coordination with Canada creates a synchronized North American pressure system that multiplies the impact. By aligning announcement timing and targeting complementary sectors, these two economic powers have effectively amplified their individual responses. This strategic alignment creates a more psychologically impactful message that America's closest trading partners are willing to act in concert against policies they find objectionable. The unified response from all 27 EU member states represents a significant evolution in transatlantic relations. Historically, European powers have often absorbed American economic policies with limited coordinated response. This new approach signals that European economies will respond with proportional countermeasures when their economic interests are threatened, fundamentally altering the calculation of costs and benefits in future trade decisions. Most concerning for American policymakers should be the indication that this package represents only the first phase of a multi-stage strategy. European officials have prepared additional measures that can be implemented if current policies remain unchanged, suggesting an escalatory pathway has been mapped out well in advance. This staged approach creates a dynamic framework for sustained economic leverage that can be calibrated based on American responses. While Europe pursues its carefully orchestrated tariff strategy, a more fundamental threat to American economic stability emerges from the north. Canada's potential reconsideration of its its role as America's dominant oil supplier represents a vulnerability that strikes at the very foundation of U.S. energy security. The staggering volume of 4.3 million barrels of Canadian crude that cross the border daily accounts for 60% of all American oil imports, creating Canada's most potent economic leverage in the ongoing trade dispute. Canadian officials have initiated internal discussions about redirecting a portion of their substantial oil exports away from U.S. markets. This strategic shift coincides with the expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which has nearly tripled capacity from 300,000 to 890,000 barrels per day, creating a direct pathway for Canadian oil to reach Chinese buyers, precisely when U.S.-Canada trade relations face unprecedented strain. Canada's pipeline expansion functions like opening a new valve, potentially redirecting the flow of energy away from the American grid and contradicting promises of complete energy independence. What makes this potential redirection particularly concerning is the specialized nature of U.S. refining infrastructure. Refineries across the Midwest have been specifically engineered to process the heavy crude from Alberta's oil sands. These facilities cannot switch to alternative oil sources without prohibitive costs and operational disruptions. As the chemical composition of Canadian heavy crude differs substantially from most other varieties, creating a technical dependency that compounds the volume vulnerability. Energy security analysts project alarming consequences from even modest reductions in Canadian oil exports. Their models indicate gasoline prices could increase by 25 to 40% across America, with particularly severe impacts in states most dependent on Canadian imports. For middle-class Americans already struggling with inflation, such price increases would immediately reduce disposable income and potentially trigger broader economic contraction. The Canadian government appears to be positioning for a long-term strategic realignment of its energy export priorities. Officials have initiated comprehensive feasibility studies examining expanded export capacity to Asian markets, particularly focusing on infrastructure improvements, facilitating increased shipments to China and other Pacific Rim nations. These studies signal a deliberate strategy to diversify Canada's energy customer base and gradually reduce its historical dependence on American buyers. Industry experts emphasize that American domestic production cannot compensate for any significant reduction in Canadian imports. While U.S. shale production has increased dramatically, it yields light crude with fundamentally different properties from Alberta's heavy crude, meaning even with America's impressive domestic capabilities, a decrease in Canadian imports would create supply shortages domestic producers cannot address. The political dynamics within Canada further complicate this situation. Provincial leaders from Alberta and British Columbia have publicly advocated leveraging oil exports as a response to American tariff policies. These regional officials, who exercise substantial control over natural resource development, have expressed increasing frustration with U.S. trade positions, suggesting growing political support for using energy exports as a strategic tool in bilateral negotiations. This energy leverage fundamentally alters the power dynamics in U.S.-Canada trade relations, creating an inherently asymmetric negotiating position that grants Canadian negotiators unusually strong leverage in any potential resolution discussions. Beyond the energy sector, Canada holds another powerful card in its diplomatic deck: geographic leverage over America's northernmost frontier. Alaska exists as a territorial island, physically separated from the mainland United States by Canadian territory, creating a vulnerability few Americans considered until British Columbia Premier David Eby's recent announcement of potential tariffs on U.S. commercial trucks traveling to Alaska. The Alaska Highway through British Columbia and Yukon serves as the lifeline for Alaska, handling approximately 80% of all ground-transported goods entering the state. Unlike other cross-border relationships where alternative routes exist, Alaska's isolation creates what one analyst called a geographic choke point that transforms Canadian goodwill into an economic necessity. This dependency places Alaska's 736,000 residents in the extraordinary position of relying on a single corridor for basic necessities. Premier Eby's proposed legislation would establish substantial tariffs specifically targeting American commercial vehicles bound for Alaska, creating what economists term a captive market scenario. where consumers have no alternative but to absorb increased costs. Economic models from the University of Alaska indicate these measures would trigger price increases of 15 to 30% for essential consumer goods, including groceries, electronics, and building materials. This isn't simply about reciprocal tariffs on comparable products, explains Dr. Margaret Chen at the University of British Columbia. This represents a fundamental vulnerability where a Canadian provincial government, not even federal authorities, can unilaterally impact the economic well-being of American citizens through geographic leverage. Alaska's $4.5 billion tourism industry faces additional exposure through maritime regulations. Under the Passenger Vessel Services Act, foreign-flagged cruise ships serving Alaska must dock at Canadian ports before continuing northward. For cruise operators serving the Alaska market, this creates a precarious situation, as Canadian officials have begun exploring regulatory adjustments that could impose additional requirements or fees on these vessels. The Alaska Travel Industry Association estimates that every 1% reduction in cruise tourism costs the state approximately $33 million, with coastal communities like Juneau and Ketchikan bearing the heaviest impact. The most concerning aspect involves food security implications for remote communities. The Alaska Food Coalition has identified 92 rural communities whose food security would be significantly compromised by even minor disruptions to the ground transportation corridor. Communities already paying $7 for a gallon of milk could see prices increase to $9 or more, notes Sarah Johnson, director of the Alaska Rural Policy Initiative. For households already allocating over 30% of their income to food expenses, these increases aren't just inconvenient, they represent genuine hardship. What makes this situation unique is how it transforms traditional dynamics of international trade disputes. While federal governments typically negotiate with clearly defined national interests, the Alaska scenario demonstrates how integrated North American supply chains create dependencies that can be leveraged at the provincial level, creating pressure points targeting specific American constituencies without requiring federal coordination. While Canada manipulates physical borders to exert pressure, a more insidious extraction is quietly unfolding. The United States is experiencing a hemorrhage of its most valuable resource, not oil, steel, or agricultural products, but human intellectual capital. What happens when a nation's brightest minds decide their futures lie elsewhere? A reverse pipeline of talent has formed, draining American innovation capacity as systematically as oil flows through traditional pipelines. The statistics paint a concerning picture. Applications for Canada's Express Entry program from American professionals have surged by 128% since 2020, while the EU's Blue Card program recorded a 73% increase in American applicants during the same period. These migrations coincide with strategic talent acquisition initiatives like Canada's Global Skills Strategy, offering 2-week work permit processing, a stark contrast to years-long US green card waits, and Germany's Make It in Germany program, establishing recruitment offices in Boston, Chicago, and San Francisco to directly approach American scientists and engineers. "We're witnessing an unprecedented competition for cognitive capital," explains Dr. Elaine Mordaunt, director of the Center for International Talent Flows at Stanford University. Countries are competing for the minds that drive innovation economies. The current administration's immigration restrictions and scientific funding cuts have created an opportunity that competitor nations are exploiting systematically. The economic impact is severe. The Council of Economic Advisors estimates each emigrating high-skilled professional represents a $2.3 million loss in lifetime economic contribution, translating to approximately $86 billion annually. This brain drain compounds as research clusters and innovation ecosystems follow talent migrations, creating self-reinforcing cycles of intellectual capital flight. Dr. Jennifer Wyatt exemplifies this trend. A former MIT quantum computing researcher, now at the University of British Columbia, she explains, "It wasn't just about funding or salary. It was about entering an environment where evidence-based policymaking is respected and scientific consensus isn't treated as a political position. The instability became untenable." Her experience reflects findings from National Academy of Sciences exit interviews, where departing researchers consistently cite policy concerns over financial considerations. The talent exodus spans critical sectors. According to the National Science Foundation, applications from American researchers to European funding programs have increased 61% since 2021, with AI and quantum computing researchers leading. Healthcare professionals are similarly departing, with the Canadian Medical Association reporting tripled applications from US-trained physicians, citing practice restrictions and healthcare policy uncertainty. European and Canadian institutions have implemented targeted recruitment strategies. The Max Planck Society's Bridge to America initiative successfully recruited 135 senior American scientists in just 1 year. More dramatically, the University of Toronto's AI Excellence Program prompted 7 complete AI research teams from American universities to transfer their operations north within 6 months, representing not only current intellectual loss, but future generations of researchers. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau acknowledged this strategy. While others build walls, we're building welcome mats. Canada's economic future depends on attracting the world's best and brightest, and we're providing the stability, inclusivity, and support they need to thrive. The coordinated responses from the European Union and Canada represent a fundamental shift in international economic relations, with calculated countermeasures designed to create maximum political and economic pressure on the United States. These measures collectively form an economic vice, gradually squeezing America through energy dependencies, geographic vulnerabilities, and intellectual capital migration. This new paradigm reveals a startling reality. Traditional US allies have developed the capacity to deploy precise economic countermeasures that challenge American leverage. Their meticulously calibrated approach, targeting specific constituencies while minimizing self-harm, signals a permanent transformation in transatlantic relations. As these sophisticated strategies unfold, we must consider what is the true cost of these geopolitical power plays on America's economic sovereignty.